Frontline.
Once again, a call to fight corruption is made at the National Leadership Institute in Changkwanzi by the ruling party in their latest retreat. It's an echo of a similar call made several occasions in the past by the head of state and NRM chairperson Yoweri Museveni.
Corruption is employee disloyalty in a private company. Because also, don't just talk of corruption in the government. We must also address corruption in the private sector.
But while Ugandans have been accustomed to more talk and less action against corruption and misrule by their leaders, our neighbors to the east have had enough of the talk. Barely a month after Kenyans Gen Zs started rattling the political cage with mass protests triggered by proposed new taxes, President Ruto has been forced to make one concession after another. Today, he fired his entire cabinet, retaining only his deputy president and the prime cabinet secretary.
I have today, in line with the powers given to me by Article 1521 and 1525B of the Constitution and Sections 12 of the Office of the Attorney General's Act, decided to dismiss with immediate effect all the cabinet secretaries and Attorney General of the Republic of Kenya, of the Cabinet of Kenya.
As Uganda's aging leaders gather for introspection in Changkwanzi, what lessons does the Kenyan experience have to offer? With a young citizenry that cannot relate the bourgeois exploits the NRM old guard likes to brag about, a population daily treated to sights of opulence and exorbitant spending from their leaders, while most of them drown helplessly in poverty, what new tale will the NRM weave to soothe their empty stomachs for just another day? Can this retreat finally provide the jolt that this government needs to respond effectively to the concerns of the so-called Gen Z? This is The Frontline.
NBS Frontline.
A very good evening and welcome to this edition of The Frontline on NBS TV. My name is Charles Mwangu Shampagi. President Yoweri Museveni has taken his entire cabinet and permanent secretaries and other government officials for a week-long retreat in Changkwanzi. Will this help him reset his war on corruption? What about service delivery? Can actually a retreat help him achieve some of those? Looking back, what have they been discussing in Changkwanzi over the last so many days? They're still in Changkwanzi through tomorrow and Saturday and will be returning on Sunday. How much can they achieve? What can they do that they have failed to do? What can they strengthen? And how do they rejig whatever it is they're trying to do? Across the border in Kenya, Gen Zs, as they're called, Generation Z, the young people of Kenya are reshaping the political discussion in that country. Just this afternoon, they forced President William Samoei Ruto to fire his entire cabinet, leaving only 2 members. The deputy president, who was a running mate, so he can't fire him, and his minister in charge of foreign affairs, cabinet secretary for foreign affairs, Musalia Mudavadi. Those are the only 2 surviving. The rest of what they call cabinet secretaries have been sent packing, a demand of the young people of that country who are saying, what are you delivering to us? We're not satisfied. The interesting bit is that the young people are saying, yes, you have fired cabinet, we're still not satisfied. What more are they looking for? To discuss that and more with me tonight on The Frontline, I have at the extreme end, I have the Honorable Mwanga Chivumbi. He represents the people of Butambala in the 11th Parliament of Uganda. Very nice to have you, sir.
Nice to be here once again, and good evening to the panelists and my good friend Godba. It's a long time. Is the dog still there?
I have from the Uganda Media Center, from Kapelebyong and Mulanda, a member of this panel, a frontliner, Ofono Opondo. He has actually been in Changkwanzi. Welcome to The Frontline.
Thank you, Charles. Good evening to my fellow panelists tonight. Good evening to our viewers. Chankwanzi is good. And the other two places are terrific.
Terrific.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember we shared a platform in Chankwanzi in 2016.
Is Rogo still at the media center?
Yes.
What happened?
Have you fired me?
No,
is there something? Is there something you know that I don't know?
Let me introduce you. I'll come back to you in a moment. Goodbye to Mushabe. He is the team leader at the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, GLIS. He's also a coffee farmer, and he does a few other things. Yeah, you also teach at Makerere.
Yeah.
Yes, School of Law.
Very delighted to be here. Thank you very much, Charles. Good evening, colleagues, and good evening, our viewers.
And we'll have a unique show this evening because we'll have a link with two other panelists joining us from Chankwanzi. I'll introduce them when they get online. Or let me start with you. You've been in Chankwanzi and you're watching what's been going on, not just in this country, but also across the border in Kenya. The conversation about how governments deal with, one, service delivery, two, the fight against corruption is being reshaped in a significant way. Do you think that from your interaction with members of cabinet in Chankwanzi that this retreat addresses those two critical questions?
Well, first of all, let me...
Oh yes, we'll discuss the...
Becoming a big factor.
Well, the Chankwanzi retreat, first of all, let me make it clear that annual retreat for cabinet, joint cabinet and permanent secretaries is a routine, save for the time when we had COVID. So it is a routine thing. This particular one is about introspection, looking inside the team. Are we doing the right things? And specifically, emphasis on corruption, abuse of office, wastage. I want to believe that the president and the government in general is responding, which is a good thing, to the public frustration, public complaint about these three things I've just said. Because at the opening on Monday, the president did say that he raised this discussion by admitting publicly what he had said earlier on during the State of the Nation address and also budget reading, that corruption is now a very serious matter, a very serious issue in the country. And we need to put our efforts towards combating it. He repeated this message in Chankwanzi on Monday. He has been there since that time, and every day he has spoken, and he has repeated this message on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and today.
What's the net effect of repeating a message many times over?
Yes.
When in that, in the retreat,
yes,
he has members of cabinet,
yes,
who either publicly or actually by courts of law have question marks around their integrity on that very question of corruption and service delivery.
Let me repeat what I said.
You have members that are actually facing sanctions.
Let me
and they're retreating with him.
Yeah, let me repeat what I said last week here. For those of you who are Christians or religious people, different denominations, you go to the church every day, every Sunday. You hold prayers in your rooms, you hold at your home. In Mwanga Kivumbi's case, he prays 5 days, five times at least every day. Why? Because first of all, you want to commit to your faith and recommit. You want to beseech the Creator to help you overcome the problems that you are going through or you are facing. So in this case, even in the politics, you do so. The president repeating the message for emphasis, for clarity, that this matter, we can no longer just wish-wash. And also, there have been presentations by different people, guest presenters, but also members of the cabinet. I think they have been doing soul searching. Why is this matter persistent? From what I listened to, including today, there is candid acknowledgement and people raising that we are the problems, members of the cabinet and those accounting officers who are there. So it is important for that reason for the president and all serious people in the country to keep hammering that message. Many of you go for many of you go for burials. Quite often we hear people saying the deceased had confessed, had become born again as they look towards death. And I think that the NRM government or the NRM party, we are seeing that if we don't face up to the truth with this matter, we could actually be staring into the grave.
How do you face up to the truth? Maybe let me put this to Godbar and say, can a retreat in Changwanzi achieve that soul searching, that introspection that OO is talking about? I mean, the president is sitting with, you can talk about directly one of his ministers for finance is facing prosecution before courts of law, has been sanctioned internationally over accusations of corruption. You have many other cabinet members who have been mentioned variously over allegations of involvement in corrupt practices. And you're retreating and saying, yes, we are soul searching. At the level of the chief executive of a country, and we're having this discussion with developments in Kenya today, when the president has decided to fire his entire cabinet, says, you guys cannot deliver because the people of Kenya are making demands upon me, they have expectations upon me, I must be seen to be acting.
No, you see, as a country, we really have a crisis on our hands. And you see, for people like they have been in this really for a long time. So if you go back to about 2001, there is no manifesto of NRM that has been written where they have not stated that principle called zero tolerance to corruption. If you go back to those manifestos. So, and all that you've seen over time is to see the escalation of what is, of corruption, to a point where if the president can get to a point where actually he could even go, I think if you go by the recent events, you can say the president can even hold a cabinet meeting in prison, somewhere in Ruzera, because if you have about probably 10 members of your cabinet, they are either being prosecuted for corruption, or they are suspects, or the public even actually knows them as being corrupt. You could even hold a cabinet meeting in prison. So when you talk about introspection, I think the challenge we have is the way the political class within that you would call the NRM has really become so deceptive in the way they communicate to the country. Because where do you see the deception? And unfortunately, they have had the religious leaders connive with them. That even when there are times when they've said, we want to do introspection, so they organize prayers against corruption at Kororo. You see all these religious leaders, all of them going to Kororo to pray. And the people who have committed the crime, you go to church, you go, they pray for you. Religious leaders are supposed to deal with the spiritual matters. Corruption and stealing of public funds is criminal. That one, that's the job of the state to deal with it. You use the criminal law to be able to deal with this issue. So I've said time and again that unfortunately, it doesn't matter how many retreats you have in Changwanzi. It doesn't matter how many times President Museveni repeats the whole problem of corruption. I think my own conclusion is that President Museveni is at a point where he has no capacity to deal with corruption, because corruption is the fuel that runs his regime. And you see, sometimes, of course, when we talk about corruption, we sanitize it.
What do you mean he has no capacity?
He has no capacity.
Where do you draw the line between capacity and willingness? And if you see recent, I mean, he's let prosecutors go after some of his cabinet members.
No, he has not let, because you see, the mere fact that he had first to give a speech and say, I am going to go after corrupt people. And then you have the police and all these other groups running around. When there is the system of government that works is where you have a prosecutorial agency like the police, which is the investigative agency, and the Directorate of Public Prosecutions are the ones which are going after these thieves. That's when you have a system that works. But where you wait for the president to tell you. The president has other business to do, and he should be leaving the agencies of the state that are charged with this to do it. So the mere fact that the president, first of all, has to say, I am going to go after these people, because the president is not a prosecutor. In fact, if anything, he's interfering. So it means that the institutions that have been put in place to deal with these kinds of crimes, whether it's corruption, whether it's theft, it means that they are not working. But the point I was making is that President Museveni is caught in a conundrum, because this is a gentleman whose mental programming is that he's a life president. He has to be in power. How does he stay in power? How he stays in power, part of how he stays in power is that he has access to public resources and he dispenses them at his leisure and pleasure, whether in terms of political positions, whether in terms of administrative arrangements, whether in terms of greasing the people who oppose him. So he's really in this situation where he has no capacity to change, because if he tried, by the way, he has also said it himself. He has said it himself. If you try to go after the corrupt, that even the government can corrupt. And I think he is very conscious about it. So as a country, we are really in a bad situation where you have a president who does not have. I said earlier, if President Museveni wanted to demonstrate to Ugandans that he's now changed his mind, he wants to deal with corruption, he would move out of Changwanzi, dissolve that cabinet, and reconstitute it and say, this is the new team that I'm putting in place to deal with this issue. But as long as he's dealing with all
we're
these
looking
people,
across the border, both for you and before I come to Honorable Mwanga Chivumbi, both for you, we're looking across the border and we're seeing the dramatic developments in Kenya over the last 3 to 4 weeks since the young people decided to go on the streets and demand for changes. One, they rejected a bill, the finance bill, that was imposing more taxes on them. Raided parliament when you saw the young man walking with a mess, the symbol of authority. I don't know under what authority the Kenyan parliament has been operating, because the symbol of authority was taken out. I don't know if it was brought back. Someone had a coat of arms and other people had, I think, the ceremonial dressing for senior officials in parliament. Hardly 3 weeks down the road, the president has been capitulating one step at a time. And observers are going to look at and say, Ruto is now really in a very difficult situation. How does he work himself out of it? You don't want President Museveni to work himself into a similar situation, do you?
Yeah, but you see, that's the problem. Even if you were Ruto and you don't want to walk into that situation, you can run a country where you are a militiaman, basically holding everybody hostage because you control the military, you control the police. If you choose to do that, you can do it. The difference is that Kenya is not Uganda. The Kenyans, I lived in Kenya during the dying years of the Moi dictatorship. I saw the Kenyans fight, and this is the Kenyan civil society, the Kenya Commission of Jurists, the Kenya Law Society, the National Council of Churches of Kenya, the students at the University of Nairobi. I saw them fight. They were the front line that fought against Moi's dictatorship. They eventually won, and then promulgated the new constitutions. They fought for that constitution that they are fighting to defend. In our case, President Museveni went with his friends. They created an army, went to the bush, fought the people they didn't like. They came here and said, we have given you liberation. We are giving you a constitution. They even actually, by the way, I think they even wasted our time because they engaged us in a four-year process of constitution making. Immediately, President Museveni had signed on the constitution. Within the first 1 year, before its first anniversary, he had changed it. And so I think that
you didn't blame President Museveni for that. You'd blame Ugandans. Yeah, but just like you started.
But do you know that?
You said
do you know what it is?
No,
do you know what it is to be a president?
He went with his friends.
Yes.
Fought the people he didn't like, and then told you that he's making a constitution
actually,
for
see,
you.
that's the point I'm making, Charles. That's the point I'm making, that for you to be comparing Kenya with Uganda and Kenyans with Ugandans and Ruto with Museveni, they are totally uncomparable. You are dealing with two different societies. Kenyans own Kenya. Ugandans, we are basically hostages because Museveni has his army and the security agencies. When he has wanted, if he can unleash it on you, you've seen how we have organized elections becoming violent every after 5 years until 2021 when Ugandans had to die just because we were electing a president. So these are completely different situations.
The reset that the president is, the reset, the introspection that you're talking about, if you look at what's happening across the border in Kenya, I don't know. I know you have friends across the border in Kenya. I know you watch developments there closely.
You also have relatives.
You also watch closely what has been going on there. If you compare what is going on there in terms of the fight against corruption, the fight for service delivery, and high taxation.
Well, first of all, we have two choices, and the president of Uganda has two choices to make. To evaluate the concerns of Ugandans vis-a-vis perception or reality about abuse of power and resources, which we call corruption, and on his own evaluation, takes action. He has chosen, in this particular case, to do piecemeal. Piecemeal, why? Because I have said on this show that the president is a gradualist. He chose a protracted people's war. He could have picked assassination, and he takes out Obote, takes out Ito Jok, takes out, but he chose a protracted people's war. Even with
people's war.
Yes, even with corruption and dealing with the different ailments in Uganda, he has been a gradualist. You remember, this is not the first time ministers are being prosecuted. We were prosecuted here. The vice president and attorney general has gone to jail. You remember Joseph Ekemo? You remember the three ministers over Gavi? There have been many permanent secretaries convicted and so on and so forth. And in some cases, you have seen the president exercising prerogative of mercy. I am not privy and you are not privy. What other evidence the president gets, for example, and then he extends prerogative of mercy to people who have been convicted of corruption. Some of them have been politicians, some of them have been technocrats. The most recent was Chandi Jamwa. So you cannot say he was only massaging his political cronies or whatever you would want to. Then he can choose to wait until the country reaches a boiling point, like what is in Kenya. So the choice is really for the chief.
Is that a choice? Is that a choice to make?
Yes, yeah. It is a choice to make. He can, on his own, look at what's going on before Ugandans erupt like they have erupted in Kenya, and makes the drastic step that Godba would want him to make. And the retreat in Chankwanzi does not in any way prevent the president from returning from Chankwanzi even after this retreat, and dumps the whole cabinet. Yeah. The retreat does not prevent him from doing so. Now,
the question is, I would like to see him take such a step.
From the language I hear in Chankwanzi, I am looking forward to something probably more surgical. The other one, which I want to put the third issue, is now for Ugandans. Put your demands the way the Kenyans have put theirs, and we see if the president behaves the same way. Now, that one you cannot ask him. It should be you to organize and say, Mr. President, we have seen you foot dragging. Yes, you're taking piecemeal. How do you sit with your own minister who you are prosecuting? How do you sit with a clerk to parliament who, I mean, you know, he is the one who said we have network syndicates between the Ministry of Finance and other accounting officers and Parliament. Now, it is you to say, Mr. President, we have seen you taking on 4 members of Parliament, but we have not seen an accounting officer. And so that one is now your job to organize.
Okay.
Because running the country is not just for the president alone. He runs Uganda with other Ugandans. Now, if you other Ugandans, you are not putting sufficient pressure. I'm not saying we should be destructive like the Kenyan youths did. But there are things that we can do peacefully within the laws of Uganda, and the president of the government he leads feels sufficient pressure, including forcing people to resign on their own. But you are the same people, and I agree with the Godba, the same religious people are the ones who give platform to the people Godba is, the people we say are corrupt. Why can't the religious people, if they are honest, why can't they deny those people platform?
I saw a fundraiser that had been organized in Kenya, where the wife of the president was supposed to be the chief fundraiser. And people put pressure, and the head of that religious organization rescinded and said, we're canceling this fundraiser, please don't come. And I think they have stopped political...
they have now stopped all political fundraising.
All political fundraising. Harris Sagara is watching us and says, if President Museveni is serious about fighting corruption, I dare him to fire his entire cabinet like Ruto did. I think we should hire the Kenyan youth because ours have failed us. The Honorable Mwanga Chivumbi, I want to come to you. I want to come to you, Honorable Mwanga Chivumbi, and ask, you've seen that the cabinet is retreating, but a lot of the debate over the last few months has been the focus on Parliament, especially on the fight against corruption. But also, Parliament has kicked back, has fought back and said, why are you focusing on us? Why don't you look at the entire government? And President Museveni, you head this government. You know what has been going. You actually chair a very critical committee of Parliament, which is an oversight committee, the Public Accounts Committee. Can the government of Uganda, under President Yoweri Museveni, and the ruling National Resistance Movement Party achieve a reset in its fight against corruption and service delivery?
2 things. One, the whole of Uganda is a scene of crime. I've said it before and elsewhere, is that you need to define corruption in its broadest definition. It could be financial corruption, it could be political in nature, it could be social in nature, And without picking out any institution, you broadly need to have a big talk and put a ring around the whole country and say, now, can we talk about an animal called corruption? And you may start with the financial, but this is the root cause. Even if you dissolve cabinet in Uganda, will you dissolve Museveni's family? The other day I told you, if Charles, you are the ED of NBS, you appoint your wife as a chief editor, you appoint your son as the head of account, you appoint your brother as the head of security, and now, what will that be called?
Isn't that, don't you sometimes...
No, I'm starting at that point. Because
I hear you.
I'm starting at that point. What will that be called?
What MK is asking, isn't that corruption itself?
No, I'm saying, what will that be called?
I hear
now,
you.
No, let's go and say, where did the rain start to beat us as a country?
Gachagua was asking Kenyans.
Yes.
Yes, the deputy president was asking Kenyans,
yes.
When did the rain start beating us? I've seen it repeated in parliament.
Yes. Now, even first it was Laira who put that question, when the rain started beating Kenyans. Now, you have a constitutional framework which says, you must govern for 2 terms and disappear.
Yeah.
You sit down with a section of your party and say, man, we are going to go after this one. You don't only convince them ideologically. You say, no, I will even give you a sweetener of 5 million. Before you know it, the term is lifted. You say, now, we even put age. And we've been around, all of us. Godiba, even you, Charles.
Yeah.
You know how? 5, we go for age, Tojikwatako. There was an article there called Article 110. Was it 110? Which was a transaction. Actually, there was a discussion between him and the caucus, where a member of parliament, boldly, whom I will not reveal, told, Mr. President, when you remove this age limit for you, will stay. For us, we shall go compensate us. Compensate us. And the fellow wanted 2 billion. Said, that is corruption. But he finally agreed on some article, 110. It was given, everybody knows. In this very parliament we sit in, you know the story of the 40 million. You know the story of the 100 million. And you know on which account it was paid. I've said...
The people on the panel might know, our viewer doesn't know.
No, I can tell you that money was on a classified account, State House. I want anybody to come and take me on that. It was on classified account. Both instances, the money was posted on classified accounts of State House. I can tell you the figures. One was 72, another one was 50 something. I know, I can tell you the code.
I'm sure even OO knows it.
Even OO.
No, I don't audit classified. It is the members of parliament who may know.
The president of Uganda invites a committee of budget to State House. He wants to fund some enterprise for coffee. He says, you guys, find money for me. In the budget, please look through the figures that government has brought and find an allocation. Later on, you know, coffee becomes classified.
Coffee?
Yes, that money that was going for Rwabogo initiative ended up from being from a NEMO item, it was put under classified. Now, if we are going to address an animal called corruption, let everybody stand up and touch here. The Christians say, Gunsinze.
Yes. Is that what he's saying?
Yes. And then you say, that's why it starts at what point. I chair the Public Accounts Committee, and I've had an occasion to look in detail, final detail, for the last 4 months. I've also sat in the budget committee, by the way, for 7.5 years. I've literally issued all the reports he's now talking about. I already flagged. The last time I was on this talk show, I disagreed with Omara. Oh, you around. I told him we've got to deal with an animal called budgetary allocation. You remember? Because it's part of the problem. I also said you've got to do with an animal called supplementary. This animal called supplementary is where every dubious expenditure in this country is passed on. I dare the president who is in Chankwanzi whether in the next 4 months he will not bring a supplementary where Achaka is. When my committee, Achak Sugar. Yes, Achak Sugar. When my committee wanted to go to Lubowa, and the Auditor General has issued a report and said, you see, we have lost 280 billion on Lubowa transaction. The work done, the loss, he established, I'm giving you the figure, 200 billion, 280 billion was a loss to a country so far. Who issued instructions behind the scene, I know, that let that committee not dare go there? So let's address these issues as they are. Because you are speaking to an actor. I'm in the thick of things. I know who pushes, who makes which call, and what message will be. Who says, don't go to Lubowa?
So why don't you, who stopped you from doing like the Gen Zs? So you go with your committee and stay at the entrance. Don't sleep there. Spend the night there. And then we see.
For me, I'm a Mutua once. I'm not very sophisticated. I'm very regular. I'm a regular Ugandan. I'm not very sophisticated. Now, even if you want to do a Kenyan thing, why are you court-martialing people? Who, for all intent and purposes, these young people were campaigning for a particular candidate. You court-martial them. You put them as if they are terrorists. What do you call that?
Is that, how does that become?
If you want to address this animal, if you want to pose at the country and say we want to look at what has gone on.
OO talked about prayers. You're speaking the language of lamentation.
No, I'm not speaking. I'm not speaking the language of
problem to lament if things.
I'm wondering.
Yes.
What gets the country out of the situation it is in, if it is between prayer and lamentation?
Yeah, because just look. Even when you go for where I don't support reallocation. But if Parliament is removing money from a line that has not performed, where you put 1.4 trillion and 700 billion remains unspent in a given year, and you bring back the budget consequently with the same amount of money, and Parliament says, wait a minute, can't we take this one away to buy an ambulance? To build a hospital? And I know the bad side of what they do. To build a hospital, you say, those are criminals. And if you bring a budget before this panel, and in an item called others, I've put 500 billion. On an item called others, and you've put 500 billion. We tell you, please, please.
When you're doing it,
please, unpack others, which you are putting 500 billion. You fail. And because in others, you want to pay Rocco 300 of that money. And it's who wants to pay Rocco? The president. Now, if we're going to speak about what has Rocco done, it is a failing company. The other day you gave it 280 billion. It still did not come alive. Then you want to give it another?
300.
You've spent 700 billion Ugandan shillings on Atiak, no single bag of sugar. Even when you gave Atiak money, 2 billion to go and buy sugar cane from Busoga, they never even called a single truck of sugar.
I've seen trucks of sugar driving towards to that area. But we need.
The other day, easy for me. I'll give you that. The other day, question. You say, Mr. President, okay, fine. You've been telling a country, I'm buying a defense capability on classified, a contractual obligation of 1.4 trillion outright over 5 years. The contract sum 14 trillion. It was 12 trillion. It ends. Then when I question it, you say, okay, you are questioning a figure of 1.4, then it will be retooling with the same amount of money. I've also told you, including State House, including Parliament, including government agencies that get a one-off payment, and in the next year's budget, they regularize them. You are given money for a wedding, okay? For in a given year, Charles, to hold a wedding. In 2018, we give you money. In the next year, the same amount of money is now put into other things.
And we want to
extended honeymoon. We need to take a break.
Celebrate an anniversary.
I'm afraid we need to take a break. But someone called Geoffrey Walker says, I disagree with your submission, Godba, that if the president dissolves the cabinet, the government can collapse. That's not true. The UPDF is a professional army. They can take care of the government until 2026 elections. That's Geoffrey Walker. Okay, let me just take one more message and then, yes, Harold Achema, Ambassador Harold Achema is watching us from Arua and says, what is happening in Kenya is a timely wake-up call for Uganda and all African countries. For a country like Uganda, where 70% of the population consists of young people, the failure to concretely and seriously address the aspirations, concerns, expectations, and problems of the youth is a recipe for disaster. The writing is on the wall for those with eyes to see. Uganda's young people deserve a lot better. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll be linking up with more panelists joining us from Chankwanzi. We'll be right back.
NBS Frontline.
Watching the Frontline on NBS TV, and we're discussing with the Chankwanzi retreat, can Chankwanzi retreat help President Yoweri Museveni reset his government's fight against corruption and poor public service delivery? Bernard Chankara is actually watching us from Ghana. He says, there is a crisis of policy capacity in this country. The president relies heavily on the political elite. Gentlemen, we're back on air. Chankara is watching us from Ghana and says, there is a crisis of policy capacity in this country. The president relies heavily on the political elites than the technocrats. His failures to address corruption emanates from him listening to the wrong people when it comes to addressing corruption. The political corrupt can't advise the country to the right direction. We'll be joined by two other panelists all the way from Chankwanzi, and they'll be joining the panelist, Dr. Chris Baryomunsi. In studio, we have the Honorable Mwanga Chivumbi. You know him well. We have Ofono Opondo. He works under your ministry. And we have Godba Tumushabe. You pass by in Tungamo when you're going to Kanungu, so you know all the people in studio. We also have the Honorable Lydia Wanyoto Mutende. You can see her. She's also in Chankwanzi, Senior Presidential Advisor.
Lieutenant General Lydia Mutende.
And the Kopolo.
Let's hear from them. Let's hear from them. Good evening, Dr. Baryomunsi.
Yeah.
Good evening, Charles, and good evening, viewers.
Thank you for joining us. I'll come back to you in a moment. Can we hear Lydia's voice? Honorable Wanyoto Mutende, could you say hello to our viewers and the panelists in studio?
Good evening to our listeners and viewers, and good evening to the panelists. And thank you for the ranks you have accorded me.
Let me start with you, Dr. Chris Baryomunsi, and ask a very simple and straight question. You're retreating in Chankwanzi. This is not new. Cabinet has always done this. What can this latest retreat achieve in terms of government's fight against corruption, but number two, in looking back on service delivery? Can you hit that reset button with the 7 days you're spending in Chankwanzi?
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, panelists, both those who are here with me, Lydia, and those in the Kampala. Yes, we are here in Chankwanzi having an introspection retreat with a theme answering the citizens' call, improved service delivery for socio-economic transformation. You are saying it is unprecedented, but this is the retreat we usually hold. But this time it delayed because of COVID, and also the last time we were supposed to have it in 2022, we had Ebola in the Mubende area, and then we pushed it ahead. So it is not out of the ordinary. It's a retreat where ministers, permanent secretaries, and members of the Central Executive Committee of NRM are here for a week, and basically to reflect on how we are moving in terms of service delivery in the last 3 years of this term, assessing where we are, looking at the gaps, and also forging a way forward for the remaining part of the term. And we are discussing all issues, including the challenges which we are facing, like corruption and other issues. Let me say that we need to understand where NRM is coming from. This is an institution or a party that has been in charge of the affairs of this country since 1986, when President Yoweri Museveni came, and of course he inherited a country which had failed, which had collapsed. And over the years, the last 38 years, there has been remarkable progress in terms of improvement of quality of life of Ugandans, because these can be assessed with the naked eye, but also, most importantly, with the technical indicators which are done through studies. So NRM has succeeded in terms of improving the welfare, in terms of improving the quality of life of Ugandans. And that's where we are starting from. And therefore, in this retreat, we are taking stock of the progress, of the achievements registered, but also to say the reason why we are in leadership is because there are challenges, there are issues that we have to address as government. Otherwise, if there were no problems, if there were no issues, there would be no need to seek support from Ugandans, to voters, and be able to address the challenges which we face as a country. And therefore, in this retreat, we are looking at the services like healthcare, provision of education, the road and transport network, access to electricity, access to safe water. These days we have the flagship programs of wealth creation, like the parish development model, the Myoga, and all these programs. So we are assessing and taking stock of all these programs. And Ugandans, I'm sure, out there appreciate that under the NRM rule, a lot of progress has been achieved. Although, of course, we have challenges like corruption. I have been following the debate in the studio there. And we are, like we have said before, NRM stands for zero tolerance to corruption. Although there is renewed debate on corruption, it is not true that President Yoweri Museveni or NRM government are just starting to address corruption. We've been addressing it. Like O said, Vice President has been arrested in the past. Senior ministers have been arrested in the past, senior government officials. But now there is a renewed battle to tackle corruption, and you have seen members of parliament being arrested, even when they subscribe to NRM. And wait, more is going to come. More heads are going to roll. And the president, the way he works, he's methodical. Because in the fight against corruption, you need the evidence, you need the proof. It is not a matter of saying people are corrupt and then you just arrest them. The other day, the president, while addressing the nation through the State of the Nation address, he said he had been hearing that members of parliament are colluding with the accounting officers and the Ministry of Finance officials, but he had not believed until when he got evidence. And that's why he said, now you are going to see, and that's when you saw members of parliament being arrested. So fighting corruption does not mean that you just arrest whoever you come across. You need the evidence, you need this information. I hear you loud and clear saying the president should emulate what Ruto has done in Kenya. I think the circumstances and the dynamics are different. What is obtaining in Kenya is different from what is obtaining in Uganda. The political, the constitutional, the governance environment in Kenya and the issues in Kenya are different from what is happening in Uganda. So you cannot say the president, to show that he is committed to fighting corruption, he should drop cabinet members. Who told you that all of us in the cabinet are corrupt? And so the president is very steadfast, the NRM government is very steadfast, and the fight against corruption is going to move on, but the government takes steps when there is evidence, when there is information, which evidence you can produce in the court for somebody to be successfully prosecuted. Otherwise, it's not a matter of just arresting whoever you hear about. There must be thorough investigation, and then you have
thank you, Dr. Baryomonse.
Enough evidence to have somebody prosecuted.
Thank you, Dr. Baryomonse. But some people are going to ask, and let me put this to Lydia Wanyoto, and ask the question and say, people are going to question, if you declare zero tolerance to corruption, a pledge, as Godba said here, has been made in every successive NRM manifesto since 2001. So you're talking about 20 years, 4 manifestos, all declaring zero tolerance to corruption. To leave that would require that you actually distance the government from anybody who has had any blot until they clear themselves. The practice by President Yoweri Museveni has been different, and you are retreating in Chankwanzi, and there are members who are being prosecuted, and they're still sitting with you in this retreat in cabinet, and they're discussing, they're doing introspection as well as the rest of the people, and people asking and saying, are you really serious about this zero tolerance to corruption? And Lydia, I know you served in the East African Legislative Assembly, IALA. So you interacted with colleagues from Kenya, from Tanzania, and from across East Africa. You see what is going on in Kenya today. Young people making demands and government responding to them. How does this introspection really help get that message home that we are not just watching, we are listening, and we are willing to take action?
Thank you so much for the questions. Part of the reason why we are here is an accountability retreat. We are here to listen to the different sectors. That's why the accounting officers are here, together with their political heads. And prosecuting corruption is personal. And our laws in Uganda are very clear on one side. But also, there is the political element, like you've all said. So we need to work together and ensure that the two sides of the advance against corruption are balanced, without victimizing everybody, but causing people to account, especially accounting officers. And I want to agree that many people are talking about corruption, but some elements even border impunity. But there is an issue of evidence and then political accountability. So this conversation is not only with you, Charles, and the people in the studio in Kampala. We are all concerned, and we are trying to see how this can come to an end from the political side for which we represent Ugandans. Because, as you know, NRM has a social contract of Ugandans from 2021 to 2026. So we are looking at many areas, including the implementation of the NRM manifesto, and we are coming to the end of the third National Development Plan, entering into the fourth National Development Plan. But your question is mainly on corruption. I am not aware of any concluded prosecution, but we have suspects who are in courts of law, but we have made our political contribution clear that we really want to have zero tolerance to corruption. But we do not want to victimize also Ugandans. So this conversation is open. Let's join hands. I appreciate the voices of the civil society from people like my brother Godba. And some of you sound very frustrated, but work is ongoing and we should not give up. Let these messages come out and we receive them, but also allow courts to do their work. And we've also made it clear that the political leadership should also do their work.
Bring this back to studio. And I'll start with a message from Jimmy Kiberu, who's watching us from Nairobi. And he says, Gen Z is the new unofficial opposition in Kenya. Together with millennials, they have single-handedly delivered what opposition has failed to deliver since 1963. As things stand, electoral reforms are on top of the agenda. In a few months, MPs who voted yes to Finance Bill 2024 will be the first victims of these electoral reforms to recall underperforming and conflicted MPs. Do Ugandans realize that electoral reforms have consistently failed to be discussed and implemented for over 3 electoral cycles? It's time to stop that circus. Let's bring this conversation back here. I want to start with, to come back to you, Oo. Yes, I see yourself, Honorable Anyoto Mutende, the Honorable Minister, are all deferring to court processes, evidence, prosecution. There is a clear line drawn between political action in the fight against corruption and prosecutorial action, which would take the investigators, the police, CID, the Directorate of Public Prosecutions, and the court system. That has a clear line away from the political action that can be taken. What many Ugandans are watching and saying, no, it is the political action that is lacking. And because of the political action, it is overbearing on the other side that should be taking prosecutorial.
Before I answer that one directly, I don't want us to leave these guys off the hook. These guys in parliament who enjoy immunity.
Yes. You're kicking the can.
No,
executive.
No. Listen.
Yes.
These guys in parliament who enjoy immunity under the Constitution of Uganda and can hold the executive to account. Do they do it effectively? My response is that no. Particularly the ones who claim they are in opposition. And we have the most recent still ongoing. How much have you heard them speak about the reported transgressions in Parliament? Name for me 2, 3, 4, if your fingers can feel 10 of them who have stood on the floor of the House and spoken about reported transgressions, financial transgressions, or nepotism in the Parliament. So these guys, let them not come.
I'm told some of them have refused to sign.
Yeah, no, even if they don't sign, but at least let them speak from the dispatch box on the record to demand the leadership of Parliament to explain to them, to come clean. So I don't want, so first of all, I don't want them to come on a show like this to posture that they are serious on accountability on fighting corruption. Now, the one you're asking me. First of all, the president the president and the government system has investigated people, has prosecuted people. In some cases, we have secured convictions. And I have said so here, I have listed the big and small. The second one is what I said earlier on, that the president has a choice. But and I said he has a choice, however, we must take his background and his practice. I've said that the president is a gradualist on the things he do, not just corruption. And he himself said it in Chankwanzi, he repeated it. He said, sometimes the mistakes people make, I prefer things to play out over a period of time so that the mistake makers come to self-realization by themselves that the line they are taking is not tenable. Also, he said, I want Ugandans to see, expose them. And so, do I expect the president all of a sudden be a Russia guy? I don't expect him to do so. I expect him to continue with his graduates. Then I said, he now has a choice. Does he want, do I expect the president of Uganda, Mr. Yoweri Museveni, to copy Ruto, to act under pressure and dismisses everybody? I don't expect him to do so. But also to tie with what Lydia said, that once you have established the rule of law, you cannot run the country just on pressure and perception, that because you want to please the noisy public, then you dismiss everybody because then it is not...
Noisy public wouldn't include your inspectorate of government saying you're losing 9.7 trillion to corruption annually.
Yeah, but that inspectorate... And I even want to take that inspectorate of government. I even want to take that inspectorate of government. What evidence has the inspectorate of government brought against the people he says make Uganda lose 9.7 trillion in a year? Because the inspectorate of government has all the tools backed by the law to detect, to investigate, and bring to prosecution. In the last 3 years, tell me 2, 3, 4, 5 cases, high profile, that the inspectorate of government has brought to court and has actually either secured conviction or was dismissed for lack of incriminating evidence. So I think some of the statements being made by some of those institutions are also posturing. There's the minimum you, the media people, have asked from the inspectorate of government. Give us declarations. I have seen, I think this week, the other week, there is a new group which has come up and said, give us the declarations by the following public office bearers. If the inspectorate of government means what she says, I'm looking forward to see if she wants to hide behind legalese. At least let her do that basic minimum. You have asked us to give you the what the speaker, what the president, what the vice president declared, and what herself, because they've been asked her to give them her own
declaration.
Let us wait. If she will, then I will know that she's serious. That she's serious, not just posturing.
But if one individual heading a critical government entity like that is not serious, doesn't that reflect on the seriousness of the entire government?
No, I am saying I'm waiting.
Yes.
Just this small test.
Introspection.
Do you think the IGG is serious?
I have just posed the question. I've just posed the question that if and that's not that's not.
You're still waiting for
yes. Okay. First of all, I have said she has spent some time, about 3 years. She has resources behind her, and I'm questioning. I said, with the tools the inspectorate has, what, apart from talking, how many cases? At least the Mwanga Kivumbi is on Parliament, in Park, at least they have done naming and shaming. Naming and shaming. And in some cases, they have made referrals to police for further investigation, and probably even some have reached prosecution. For example, the one of the cooperatives, these ones of the Mawandas, the Michael Mawandas, actually came from Parliament. Whatever you disagree with them, at least on that one, it is their report.
I've seen the Observer reporting an expanded list of beneficiaries from the cooperative
yes,
money.
now, the other one, the Mabati scandal, for example, came from the office of the president, ISO in particular. And then they kicked in this one of Isoke and corruption. And at least you can, whatever you may, you can say, out of the 25 named, at least we have 3.
Okay, one quick question for you, and I need a short answer to it, and then I'll go to Honorable Mwanga Chivumbi. This retreat in Chankwanzi,
yes,
shouldn't it be a moment when the president does, what do we call it? We call it an evaluation of the performance of his cabinet.
No, that's
key performance indicators, and he's evaluating them and saying, you have done, you haven't done.
I can tell you, there's hard talk in Chankwanzi. The president to his ministers, but also ministers to each other. Permanent secretary to their ministers, ministers to their, in a collective. Everybody is hearing what somebody is saying about the other. So there's hard talk.
Thank you.
But I also want to add this, that when you go to the confession box and the priest listens to your sins, the priest doesn't excommunicate you. So the confession box, I've lived with the people who have gone to the confession box. The president of Uganda has probably chosen, the president of Uganda has chosen to balance that, yes, I can listen to your sins
and live with you.
And I will accept your renewal in the faith, and you promise me that you are going to change your ways.
What used to happen?
It is not only the president who forgives.
Lots of things have changed.
Yes. But unfortunately,
there's an old man from
unfortunately for
I
you,
think he's since passed on.
For you, you want the president to excommunicate. As soon as
there's a man, I think he's from Muntungamo, who got saved, went into a church and declared what he had done.
Yeah, the one of the electoral commission, the cow, the returning officer.
No, it was not the cow. It was a different person, I think.
No, he was actually, at that time, cows were the returning officers.
Yes.
And the man had diverted election money.
What happened to him?
So when eventually he was caught, he was actually imprisoned.
When he declared that I have gotten saved,
yes,
and he announced his sins,
yes,
and said, I am getting saved, this is what I did. You know, good old Anglican Christians.
Yes.
He was prosecuted.
Yes.
For
Yes.
But the Honorable Mwanga
recently we had the case of Church of Uganda. Did the church excommunicate that person, their former leader?
Honorable Mwanga Chivumbi, I need to come to you. The ping pong that goes on about the fight against corruption, the resolve and what you in the opposition are able to do to push government to actually change its ways. I mean, there's a valid concern that you haven't effectively mobilized. Jimmy Chiberu told us what the Gen Zs in Kenya are achieving, the opposition has failed to achieve since 1963, since Kenya got independence. Can you say the Ugandan opposition has actually... yes,
successful movements are non-partisan. You fail when you begin to divide the country amidst a common struggle. And you say now these are opposition. Now the common denominator about the Arab Spring, about the Sudan, the one that toppled Bashir, is that they, first of all, put aside political actors. Therefore, any diversion in the struggle against good governance and want to zero it between the ruling party and those that aspire to take over from them, then you misdirect a country. And I want to debunk those who are choosing that kind of approach, to tell them you are ideologically seriously lacking in how these civic movements work. Actually, the more it is more authentic and organic is when it does not have political color. That's right. And I think the success of the Kenyan movement is that, first of all, said our problem is the tax bill, the tax law. And they squarely faced on that. Then they've said, oh, wait a minute, now we have these other demands. As Kenyans, you've seen Ruto's daughter literally speaking the same language as the other boy on the street.
And she's saying, I'm a Kenyan.
And she's saying, I'm a Kenyan. And she's speaking like a generational voice in these matters. So I would caution Ugandans to school themselves more thorough on how to organize civic movement.
Especially OO.
Especially OO. Yes,
I can see you are trying to create an escape route for the opposition.
No.
To abdicate.
No, I'm not saying
the reason we elected you to become opposition.
Please.
I'm not saying, to be the front.
By the way, I'm not saying if you want to build a genuine movement that can foster change. That's why he asked you,
are you saying the opposition,
if you were Ugandan,
are you saying the opposition cannot foster change?
What I'm saying, if you were Ugandan genuinely concerned about Lubowa, can we walk neck to neck, shoulder to shoulder, and go to Lubowa and camp there? Because when the police sees you, yes, when the police sees you as the government spokesman, genuinely in the front, it will not act the way it acts when it sees me.
I'm glad that you are considering that you can't foster change.
No, fine. You can take that cheap line, and I call it cheap, and I qualify it as total cheapness. No, total cheapness. But if you want to build a genuine movement to foster change, we must make it broad-based, non-partisan. Because
who's going to lead that?
No, who's going to lead that?
Make it
who has led that Gen Z? Is it Raila Odinga? Or Kalonzo Musyoka?
Kizza Besigye has been calling you tonight.
I'm asking. Let's take the Kenyan example. Have they told you that the leader of that movement is Raila Odinga? Or is Kalonzo Musyoka? Or Charity Ngeru? Or you know the actors there? It's a genuine pro-people's movement. And the challenge that why the government has been successful is to divide Ugandans. When they want you to fail, they say, this is opposition, this is NRM, these are Baganda, these are Banyankore, these are Christians. So let us unite around the common, and including those who tweet. Who tweet. Because it will mean the next level of where I will test these other people. Very busy on Twitter is when they will put away their phones and say, now we go.
Okay.
and I'm waiting for 20 seconds. And I will be there quietly.
20 seconds.
Is it 20 seconds? There's a date they've placed. Because I want genuine Uganda to take a lead, and I'm willing to cheer them up. And I want you all to be there. Because it also takes a taxpayer.
Is MK saying the opposition in Uganda is not genuine?
Please.
Gentlemen, let's bring in our colleagues in Chankwanzi. The panelists to also join. Yes, I'll come to you in a moment. But Ronald Mvula says, what I demand, putting all other issues aside, what I demand of President Museveni is that the integration of East Africa, he should achieve the integration of East Africa before he retires. I don't know if he's planning to retire yet, but we'll know that. Dr. Mariomus, I want to come back to you. I know you've been following the discussion in studio. One, I need you to respond to the comments from Ofono Pondo and Mwanga Chivumbi, but specifically, the question I put to Ofono Pondo. In an ideal situation, rather than an introspection, shouldn't the president have been doing an evaluation of the performance of his cabinet, him as the head of it? Yes, are you able to, I'm not sure if Dr. Barimos is hearing us. Lydia, are you able to hear us? Lydia, can you hear us? Okay, let's come back briefly to the studio, and I want to come to you, Godba. You were described as an activist by Ofono Pondo. I don't know if you are an activist, but no. It was Lydia. Yes, call you an activist. What is the missing ingredient? What is the missing ingredient in, one, the fight against corruption, but two, in this whole fight against corruption?
No, I think
let
me start from the point of view of the voice of civil society.
Yes.
All these guys you see here, they are civil society. We are all citizens. So the compartmentalization that MK is talking about is part of our problem. Because when I come to speak here, when I speak, first and foremost, I speak as a citizen of Uganda. There's no tribe in Uganda called civil society. I'm just a citizen, like each one of us, just you are in the media, whatever. So I think that bottom line is that we as Ugandans need to be thinking about our country, no matter our different affiliations. Secondly, I think one of the challenges that we have is it has also been perpetuated by the media, which dichotomize the debate between the ruling party and opposition. There's always an attempt to do a dichotomy. And you know, for this country, we are so unfortunate because we don't have a ruling party. What we have is a group of people who have been able to capture the state and use it to achieve certain objectives. And when you don't have a ruling party, then you can't have opposition political parties. The business of transforming a country now rests with the citizens, all of us in our different formations. For me, the way I describe NRM is that I look at NRM as the modern-day Imperial British East African company. If you remember the company called Iberia.
Iberia.
When the colonialists came here, the British came here, they created Uganda into a protectorate and contracted a company called Iberia to manage the affairs of Uganda. So the way this group called NRM has been running Uganda is really like Iberia. For all intents and purposes, they control all the resources of the state. They deploy them the way they want. Without any due regard on who else is in Uganda that does not belong to NRM.
Built for you the Uganda Railway.
From
Mombasa to
so in other words, NRM is a very, very bad performing version of IBE. Thirdly, you see, Chris talked about the prosecutions. Again, I think that's part of the corruption because you see, every time President Museveni talks about evidence, the job of correcting evidence and prosecuting people is not his job. He's a head of state. He is a political leader. He appoints people. All these people all these ministers, he's the one who appoints them. We don't ask him. He doesn't even ask us. He appoints them on his own. He uses our money to pay them. When they fail to do their work, it is his job to either ask them to resign or to fire them. So the work of investigating and prosecuting and adjudicating these cases where things go criminal is the job of the police, the Directorate of Public Prosecution, the courts. Even the idea that Museveni has evidence of collusion between MPs and finance, and he's the one who is deciding, you arrest the other MP, this one. That's also criminal. Actually, that's also corruption in its own, because that is not his job. Because the reason the DPP, or the Directorate of Public Prosecution, is in the Constitution is because this is supposed to be an independent entity that can be able to do criminal prosecutions without any partisan inclination. So yes. Basically, there is the whole corruption and corruption fight right now is being mismanaged completely, including with the participation of the president. Let me make just one last point.
Yes, and then I'll cross back to Chankwanzi.
Because you see, people like OO and others who are within the regime, they will explain. So Museveni takes his time. He wants to, you know, you do this, you do introspection. You say, Charles, I was at my coffee farm in May, and I had some work to do there. And at one of the days, because it was these are 9 acres of coffee. So on one of the days, I had 285 people turn up to work. Of these, over 90% of them were women. Of the 90%, over 80% of them were young women between the ages of around 12, 14 to 26. So I am looking at, saying Museveni takes his time, what is a protracted something. These children who are not able to go through primary school, they can't complete 7 years of school. Basically, for them, they have lost their future completely because Museveni has to take his time because he's doing protracted something. Today, if you look at the data from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, from 1997 when UPE was introduced to 2022 when the last cohort of primary school children sat for primary 7, or the one that went to S1, there are over 26 million children that did not reach primary 7. What you guys are doing is that you've completely eaten and stolen the future of all these children. So this thing of like the man is taking his time, no, that's not the job he's paid to do. His job is to run a country that is efficient, that where a government
on that point, let's cross to Chankwanz and have Dr. Chris Barriomons respond exactly to that. How much longer can we afford this patience?
You see, Charles, there is no crisis in Uganda as we speak. Yes, there are challenges which we are addressing, but Godiba should not talk as if there is a crisis and the world is ending here. I told you earlier on that there is a way we measure quality of life. And indeed, the introduction of UPE and the other interventions clearly show that there has been improvement in many indicators. So like UPE enabled us to have many children access education. Yes, there are issues of quality, there are issues of dropouts, which we are discussing, and that's why we are in a retreat to look at how do we make primary and secondary education compulsory, free, and ensure that all Ugandan children can be in school beyond primary education. That's why we retreat here to look at service delivery. But an impression should not be created that as if Uganda is in a crisis, that there is a dilemma. And even when we speak of corruption, we should not create an impression as if corruption is an issue of government alone. Just the rot within civil society and across different sectors. Corruption is a challenge for our society, yes, government inclusive, but also even the non-government actors included. And it should take all of us to unite and be able to condemn corruption and fight corruption. I don't agree with Godiba when he said the president should not be a gradualist. There must be evidence. You cannot act the mean way, where you just hear through gossip, through rumors, and then you shoot somebody. I mean, this is a country governed under rule of law. We are not under anarchy. Yes, even when we know that corruption is a vice, it's an evil, but there must be investigation, there must be evidence. For you to say you are sacking a minister, you must have proof that, yes, there are these allegations and there is reasonable proof. And indeed, like in the case of the Karamoja iron sheets, ministers have been dropped from cabinet in the past. Many have been taken to court and jailed. So an impression should not be created as if the president is not alive to the challenges, to the reality. And when the government says zero tolerance to corruption, yes, we shall live up to it. And like we said, we've been having hard talk here in Chankwanzi, critiquing each other, looking at where we are working well, looking at where there are challenges. Like today we had a session on corruption and issues of governance. You need to have been there to see how we're critiquing each other, and indeed where there is evidence, where there is reasonable and adequate information, heads are going to roll, both within the political circles but also within the civil service. Just watch the space. But it would be wrong to misguide the president that when you just read in the newspaper that somebody is corrupt with no evidence, that you just shoot that person or you just arrest. I think let's give a chance to the president and all the institutions to gather evidence, and then once there is proof, then the action can be taken.
Lydia, thank you, Honorable Minister. Lydia Wanyoto, the bigger question many Ugandans are asking, how patient can Ugandans or should Ugandans be? The rest of the world is racing ahead, and if you're losing 9.7 trillion to corruption, you're really being held back. And if service delivery is not coming at the rate it should be coming, then you're being held back as a country. And from what you say, from what the minister is saying, and what government says, we seem to be a very patient nation. It will happen when it happens. Can that deliver this country?
First of all, I want to inform you, Charles, that I'm also a Ugandan. So when any form of service delivery is affected, I become also a victim. And so we cannot just talk about general figures and corruption in generic terms. I heard Honorable Chivumbi saying Uganda, the whole of Uganda is a scene of crime. That's not true. I don't agree with that. For us who also have a contribution to make to the country, we want to have specifics. And when we touch a specific area or when we listen to the information, we want to have evidence and ensure that when a culprit is got or a suspect is got, there is due diligence to ensure that there is an end state to what we are doing. So I would like to say that yes, Ugandans may be thinking that there is impatience, they are impatient or not enough is being done. It's because the type of animal we are dealing with is also very complex. And we need to mobilize the community to know where the targets are, because the people that we are dealing with issues of taxpayers' money. I listened to Honorable Chivumbi, and I even think Godiba talking about corruption being a broad matter and expanding the scene of crime to the whole country. We are looking at specific people who have been given mandate to manage taxpayers' money, but also those who have been given social contract to lead our country, so that we zero in to where the problem is. If you're an accounting officer, the burden to account cannot be the same as somebody who is a beneficiary somewhere in the village. So, accounting officers are online for check. Members of Parliament, you have a constitutional mandate of oversight. Do your part. We have leaders of agencies that are actually delivering the manifesto. Every financial year, money is allocated. We are talking about a budget of 72 trillion for the financial year 2024-25, of which only 31 trillion has been an estimated collection from our country, domestic taxes. And we are going to borrow, we are going to do all sorts of things, but that person that signs or wires the money, as we say it, the tracking of the budget, the oversight role, the implementation, the monitoring and evaluation. So let's not broaden the burden of the definition of corruption to miss the target. In my humble opinion, when we give examples, we're talking about taxpayers' money. The 9.5 trillion is taxpayers' money. And if we are collecting about 32 trillion and 9 trillion is getting lost, when the releases are every quarter, I think we need to focus on the specifics and we explain to the Ugandans when we make it sound so big without breaking it down, we must unpack this animal, and let's choose. If I wanted us to choose where I sit, let's choose to handle corruption that speaks to taxpayers' money and service delivery. When we get to the bottom of that, these are known people, the accounting officers, those who sign the checks, those who approve the procurement processes, those who are able to get us loans. You know, Chivumbi tells us about the non-performing loans, the bad loans. Those are the people that we should zoom into and make sure that that one is sorted before we look at other forms of corruption, before we look at other losses we are making as a country. Because we need role models in these offices, and I want us to know or to appreciate the fact that while we have those we are called to account, we have leaders who should be role models, and the campaign or this conversation is not in vain. I would like to hear about the naming and shaming. That is action, because corruption must have a face. We have people who sign for this money. It leaves the treasury every quarter, either to build a hospital or a school or a road or a water project.
Thank you. Thank you.
Or a disaster arrangement. Because we are, as leaders, we are supposed to be protecting people and their property.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Lydia. Martin, realist, is watching us and says, Charles, is OO being honest by insinuating that Ugandans have not done enough to point out corrupt officials to the president? The truth is, there has to be some quickers wherever the elections are close. That's the view from Martin, realist, that's what he calls himself. I have a message here from this gentleman is called who? Mwese Gwasam has a very long message. He says, kindly inform those panelists who look at politics on surface. It's clear Ruto organized them or hijacked them, and he is the winner of the protests by Gen Zs. That Ruto is actually winning these Gen Zs demonstrations in Kenya. Moyo Gwatoro Bwango Rwakasenyi, I received your message. I will not be able to read it now. I'll take a message from Kenneth Intaro, who says, I greet all the panelists. I am positive about the direction in which the fight against corruption is going. Previously, there was lack of political will, but now I believe it's continuously growing. Let's take a break and pick this conversation up in a moment.
Frontline.
Welcome back to this last segment of the Frontline on NBS TV, and we're discussing the Chankwanzi retreat. Can it help President Museveni and his cabinet reset the fight against corruption and service delivery? Kato Nyansio in Kavende, Kabarole district, says, I don't see sense in dissolving the cabinet. The problem is that politics in Uganda conquered everything. I would advocate for the reduction of powers of these politicians. Dissolving the whole cabinet means total dissolving of the executive and therefore the president himself. It would be an extreme selfish act of the president to cleanse himself on expense of others. Kato Nyansio. We're wrapping up, so I'm giving Dr. Baryomunsi and Lydia Wanyoto the first opportunity. In summary, where does this leave us? And I want you to answer the specific. When you walk out of Chankwanzi on Sunday, what will you say has been the achievement out of Chankwanzi? What should we look out for? Both you, Dr. Baryomunsi, and then Lydia. A minute each one of you.
The Chankwanzi retreat, why we are gathered here, is that we are discussing the welfare of Ugandans. How do we continue to improve the welfare of Ugandans? We are discussing issues of service delivery for Ugandans. We are discussing issues of corruption and other challenges. And we shall come up with resolutions which we shall read to the public when we are back in Kampala next week. And definitely this retreat is not in vain, because it is intended to enable government, to rejuvenate the government, and be able to continue providing the services. My last comment is that there is no gap between the NRM government and the young people in Uganda. So there is no need for a movement or a demonstration, because we are a listening government. We listen, we are alive to the issues of young people, and that's why the way we've been programming over the years is that we have invested in young people in terms of education. That's why you are discussing UPE and USE, in terms of health, in terms of involvement of young people in leadership. We are now grappling with the challenge of creating employment opportunities for the young people. And therefore, here in Uganda, the situation is very different from what is obtaining in Kenya. Because if there are any issues, the young people have space to voice their concerns, either through district councils, sub-county councils. The young people are in the parliament. And therefore, those who are saying you need a movement for people to demonstrate, it is not necessary, because we have different channels through which we can pick the voices of young people, and indeed, issues of young people form part of the priorities that the NRM government is addressing. You saw the other day when traders had issues, the president had to dedicate a whole day to engage with them and listen to their issues and address their concerns. So here, the solution to our issues is not through demonstrations or riots, but rather we have adequate democratic and constitutional space for young people or any other category of Ugandans who have issues to voice them, and the NRM listens to all categories of the population, and we should be able to resolve those issues. So this retreat is in the interest of Ugandans, and we shall come up with very strong recommendations through an outcome document, which we shall be able to share with Ugandans and the rest of the public. Thank you very much, and we want to salute you and thank you for engaging us this evening.
Thank you for joining us. Let me have Lydia come in. Lydia, you're going to use about 40 seconds. Kindly wrap up. Yeah, I'll leave that open to you.
We are leaving Chankwanzi just after we have just approved the financial year 2024-2025 budget, 72 trillion, and yet we will only be able to collect about 31 trillion. The URA chiefs are here, so we are leaving with a very big message about the use of the public resources with the frugal use of resources, service delivery, and value for money. But also cautioning our public officials not to really issue populist statements that may cause us problems with the investors and tourism, and yet we are investing in these sectors to be able to balance our budget. It talk about the 9.5 trillion loss without details, without unpacking us. It's a cost to us as a country to give that, to give us the imaging of the country is very important, because we are investing into branding the country, to bring investors, to bring tourism. So we would like to make sure that if there are public statements like this, we are able to explain them, to account to them, and to take action. So I really want us to know that our being in Chankwanzi was to help us to have meeting of minds, commit ourselves to frugal use of public resources, deliver services to the people, but also ensure budget tracking and service delivery. And that's why we have done this at the beginning of the financial year, and we want to commit to Uganda that I think this time we'll do better and be more accountable to the Ugandans.
I'm coming back to studio. Yes, I'm coming back to studio. Thank you very much. Let me start with you, Godba, as you wrap up. Where does this leave us? How do we get out of this?
Two things. One is that if there is one thing that these people at Chankwanzi would really want to think about very seriously, is the whole, this nomenclature called investors. If we had time, we'd talk about this, but I keep on trying to tell government of Uganda officials that there's a difference between investors and finance. Normally, investments for finance. So sometimes you hear people that they are moving and going on trips and spending money, that they are looking for investors. All you need to do is to make sure that there is finance. Investors will normally come because they look for money. Number two is really to clarify to Chris if he's still on that.
He's watching us on Afro Mobile.
Yeah, you know, I think I feel very, very disappointed when when government officials like Chris and others talk to Ugandan and say there is no crisis. Because you see, you are talking about people who are different, living in two different worlds. Chris and others know that they have a job. Ugandan taxpayers literally look after them almost on everything. They'll probably pay for your housing, buy your car, fuel it, pay for your security. So I can fully appreciate when Chris says there is no crisis in Uganda. But if you live in the world where some of us live and meet these young people who are struggling, looking for a job, looking for a living, you interact with the people I was describing on my farm, whom you know have lost out on an education and therefore they are struggling into the future. That you are talking about over 26 million Ugandans who are unemployed and unemployable because you've not been able to give them the skills. You are talking about the women who go to our health centers across the country and they cannot get the basic medical attention. I can go on and on and on, and then a government official says, "Oh, there is no crisis." No, there is a crisis. And you know, sometimes when you appreciate that there is a crisis, it's not like you are just saying you are failing. You just need to appreciate it, because once you appreciate it, then you begin to figure out how to solve it. And just lastly, that I want the people with the right mindset to be seated in Changwanzi, because if the people in Changwanzi are saying there is no crisis, then as a country we have a problem.
Thank you. Yeah. OO and MK have 1 minute each.
Well, first of all, I've loved the MK for absolving the official position in Uganda, that they have failed to do their job. Is now shifting the burden to the civil society and the citizens generally.
But that's
your
point, not MK.
That's what he's saying. Two, I also love, Godba is saying fighting corruption shouldn't be for the president, but you blame him. He's saying it should be the police, DPP, and the judiciary.
I said
no.
Politicians.
Can you allow OO to conclude, because he has a minute?
So you have absolved the president. But remember that even when he's the president, he's first a citizen of Uganda. And therefore, he has a right to complain when things are going wrong. Now, finally, really, we are not saying the things you are talking about, that there are no people who are frustrated because there are no jobs, there's nothing to eat, and so on and so forth. We have deep problems, entrenched problems, but we don't have a crisis that you want Ugandans to think about. Yes, there are deep problems. A crisis would mean Uganda is failing. One of the reasons, partly, why the situation you are describing in Kenya perhaps cannot feature in Uganda today and tomorrow is because Ugandans have hope and believe, generally speaking, that the government of Uganda is taking them towards the right direction. The pace may be slow. That's why you can go on the street and try to mobilize. That's why BCJ, that's why my brother here, Popular Resistance Against third term failed.
Life
presidency failed because people still believed that Museveni is taking them to the right direction. And so, in that context, therefore, there is no crisis the way you are describing, but there are problems, certainly.
Thank you.
Which we, the NRM people, we want to believe that we are listening. And to conclude with your question, we think that the people in Chankwanza and NRM leaders generally are going to be changed people. We want to believe that the discussion in Chankwanzi and the discussion going around the country are not going to be in vain.
Thank you. MK, Alan Kasuja tweeted on X. The other message I read to you was from X. Someone had tweeted it. Alan Kasuja says, Ruto's decision to clean out his cabinet isn't without precedent. Kibaki did it in 2005. For weeks, permanent secretaries held fort. And he says, I remember thinking to myself, are ministers necessary? Your conclusion?
My conclusions are two. One, OO's time in China School of Propaganda.
It was useful.
You still have a minute, sir, so please use it.
Was useful. Secondly, in the battle against corruption, there is an animal called unit cost by government. And I've not had this discussion. Please go and inform you are going back to Chankwanzi to interrogate the unit cost of government's procurement. Because if you are doing a road for 6 billion, a grade 3 tarmac road, when the average cost in Africa is around 900 million, towards $1 billion, then you are in trouble. I've just looked at the Auditor General's report. We are doing the roads we are doing in Congo. We are doing them at a unit cost of 6 billion per kilometer. And we are doing a grade 3 bitumen road. That's a crisis. So you go, if you are still a government that procures goats at 7 million per goat, or you go for a local breed at 500,000, then you are in trouble. If you are a government that buys everything at inflated cost, so you can talk about the core of corruption of government is at a lack of unit costing of government. And I've not heard the president or anyone, even the PS, speak about.
By the way, in that discussion is going on in Chankwanzi, by the way. Somebody raised the goats, the cows for compensation, the restocking, and the buying of rats at 12 million. Yes.
Yes. So the question of unit cost. Lastly, let OO not tell Ugandans lies. Let's mobilize as Ugandans and say we want a better country. Forget our political colors. The way to succeed is not the way to divide ourselves. Is to be one. And I don't take OO's line. You see at every time the opposition is failing. Well, there is no opposition. There's only one country called Uganda. And let's stand together. And for the young people of this country, this is your moment. If people in Kenya can do it, use the new technology, social media, every means possible now is a weapon of reparation.
Thank you very much. Our time is out. Some interesting developments. I've seen a letter by one of the ministers, Minister of State for Finance in charge of investment, to the executive director of an entity she supervises. And the forgiving. Bernard Mkiza, that fight she's been waging for some time, and she's been talking about it in Chankwanzi as well. I think they had an interaction with the president. A very, very curious one. And then I also saw something about the kilometers of road for which we secured a loan in Kampala Capital City Authority, and how much was delivered. I think we're supposed to do about 400 kilometers of road.
In Kampala?
No, I think 200 kilometers of road in Kampala. We ended up doing about a fraction of those because of the unit cost inflation of how much a kilometer is delivered at. Our time is out. We need to get out of here. I have seen a lot of feedback from our viewers on the topic of corruption. It's not easy to find an angle that really deals with this topic. But thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thank you very much to the panelists, and especially Honorable Lydia Onyoto Mutende and Dr. Chris Bariomosi, who joined us from Chankwanzi. From me, till next Thursday.
NBS Frontline.